They say that time is a river that washes away the silt of the past, leaving only the smooth stones of memory. They are liars. Time is a stagnating pond. The mud settles, yes, but if you stir the water even slightly, with a scent, a sudden drop in temperature, the color of a winter sky, the filth rises again, choking you just as it did 50 years ago. I am an old man now. My hands shake when I hold a teacup, a tremor the doctors attribute to age, but which I know is merely the vibration of the earth at Kursk finally reaching my fingertips. I sit in this chair by the window, looking at the birch trees in the garden. But I am not here. I am back in the ground. I can still smell the damp wool. That is what comes back first, distinct and suffocating. The smell of wet Russian greatcoats, steaming in the cramped heat of the dugout, mixed with the sour, biting reek of tobacco smoke that clung to our skin like a second layer of grime. It was July 1943. The heat outside was baking the step into a brick, but down in the earth, 6 feet under the roots of the grass, it was cold and slick. The walls wept moisture. We were buried men waiting for permission to die. I remember staring at the flame of the single kerosene lantern. It flickered, gasping for oxygen in the thick air, casting long, dancing shadows against the timber supports. Across from me, a boy named Yuri sat on a crate. He could not have been more than 19. His face still holding the softness of childhood beneath the dirt. He was cleaning his Mosin Nagant over and over again. He ran the old rag along the bolt, the wood, the barrel, his movements jerky and rhythmic. He had cleaned it an hour ago. He had cleaned it the hour before that. The metal was already immaculate, gleaming with a dull, lethal sheen, but he couldn't stop. If he stopped, he would have to think about what was coming. I wanted to tell him to stop. As a hunter, you learn that unnecessary movement scares the game. You learn to be a statue, to slow your heart until you are just another part of the landscape. But I said nothing. I wasn't a hunter here. I was a medic. My job wasn't to take life, but to stitch together the meat that the machines outside would soon shred. I closed my eyes and tried to summon the taiga. I tried to transport myself back to the forests of Arkhangelsk, where the pine trees stand like cathedral pillars and the air is so crisp it tastes of ice and resin. In my mind, I was tracking a stag through the deep winter snow. In the forest, silence is a language. It tells you where the wind is, where the water flows, where the predator sleeps. When the forest goes silent, it is a warning, yes, but it is a natural warning, a bear passing through, a hawk circling. It is a silence that breathes. The silence on the Kursk salient was different. It was a dead thing. It was the silence of a held breath before a scream. Outside the dugout, the night was vast and empty, but we knew the Germans were there. We could feel them. It was a pressure in the ears, a magnetic pull of thousands of tons of steel waiting to roll forward. I felt a profound uselessness in my hands. In the north, I knew how to read the bent twig, the disturb of the moss. I knew how to navigate by the stars and the shape of the drifts. But what good was a hunter's eye against a mathematical grid of artillery coordinates? You cannot track a shell. You cannot outwit a mortar. You are not the hunter. You are the rabbit paralyzed in the open, waiting for the hawk. Dmitri, Yuri whispered, breaking the rhythm of his clanging. He didn't look up. Do you think they'll come tonight? I looked at his hands. They were white-knuckled on the rifle stock. Maybe, I said. My voice sounded rusty, foreign to my own ears. Maybe the rain will slow them. It's not raining, he said, finally looking at me. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated so large they swallowed the iris. He looked terrified, not of death but of the waiting. He was right. It wasn't raining. The earth was dry and hard. I adjusted the medical bag at my hip. It was heavy, filled with rolls of gauze, morphine ampules, tourniquets, the tools of my new trade. I hated them. I hated the smell of the antiseptic that leaked from the bag, a chemical scent that promised pain. I missed the smell of pine pitch and animal musk. I shifted my legs, the mud squelching beneath my boots. The dugout felt like a trap. In the wild, I would never burrow this deep unless I was dying. A wolf does not hide in a hole. A wolf keeps moving. But here we were told to dig. Dig or die. So we dug and we created our own tombs. The lantern sputtered, the flame dipping low before flaring bright again. The shadows jumped. Yuri went back to his rifle. The sound was like a file against my nerves. Then the air changed. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a vibration, a tremor that traveled through the timber walls and into our spines. The silence of the steppe didn't break. It shattered. A high, thin shriek pierced the heavy air, rising in pitch until it was agonizing. It wasn't a bird. No throat made by God could make a sound like that. It was the mechanical scream of incoming death. Yuri stopped cleaning. He looked up, his mouth opening to speak, perhaps to ask what it was, but the question never came. The world turned upside down. The roof of the dugout didn't just collapse. It was hammered down by the fist of a giant. The explosion was not a noise but a physical blow, a sudden, violent overpressure that sucked the air from my lungs and replaced it with dust. The lantern died instantly. Darkness, absolute and suffocating, rushed in, filled with the smell of pulverized earth and the hot, metallic taste of cordite. I was on the floor. I didn't remember falling. My mouth was full of grit. My ears were ringing a high, constant whine that drowned out the world. I scrambled in the dark, my hands grasping for purchase in the churning mud. "Yuri," I shouted, but I couldn't hear my own voice. I felt a hand grab my shoulder, fingers digging into my tunic with desperate strength. I was hauled upward, stumbling toward the rectangle of grayer darkness that was the exit. We spilled out into the trench, and I saw that the night had been set on fire. The horizon was a jagged line of flashing strobe lights. The German artillery barrage had begun. It was beautiful in a horrific, apocalyptic way. The sky was no longer black but a bruising purple and orange, lit from below by the ceaseless eruption of shells. The ground beneath our feet was convulsing. It felt as though the earth itself was in agony, trying to shake us off its back. This was the threshold. The waiting was over. The hunting grounds were open. I ran. I didn't know where, only that standing still was death. The trench was a chaotic river of men, shouting, shoving, tripping over equipment. Officers were screaming orders that were swallowed by the cacophony. A shell landed 50 meters away, and the shockwave threw me against the trench wall. The dirt tasted of iron. My medical training, drilled into me for weeks in the rear, kicked in. It was a rote, mechanical thing, separate from my mind. But my mind was reeling. This wasn't war. This was industrial slaughter. I looked over the parapet for a fraction of a second. The landscape I had seen at dusk, the rolling fields of wheat, the distant tree line, was gone. In its place was a moonscape of cratered earth, churning smoke and fire. The terrain was shifting every second. A hill that existed a moment ago was now a crater. A clear path was now a wall of flame. I told myself. I crouched low, pressing my shoulder into the clay. The panic began to recede, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. This was a forest of fire and steel, but a forest nonetheless. The shells were the weather, unpredictable but with patterns. The machine gun fire, tracing lines of green light through the smoke, was the wind. You had to move against it or under it. I saw a man lying on the berm, fully exposed. He was screaming, clutching his leg. The trench was safe, but he was out there in the open. "Medic," the cry was faint, barely audible over the roaring of the guns. I didn't think. I didn't decide to be brave. I simply saw a trap that had sprung, and a creature caught in it. I vaulted the trench wall. The air above the trench was thick, resisting movement. It hummed with shrapnel. I crawled belly to the ground, using my elbows and knees to drag myself forward. The mud was warm here, warm with fresh blood. I reached the man. It was a sergeant I didn't know. His leg was a ruin, shredded by mortar fragments. He looked at me, his eyes rolling in his head. "Help me," he bubbled. I grabbed his collar. "Keep your head down," I roared, though I doubt he heard me. I didn't treat him there. To treat him, there was to die with him. I dragged him. I used the contours of the blasted earth, sliding him into a fresh shell hole, waiting for the sweep of the machine gun fire to pass overhead, before heaving him over the lip of the trench. We tumbled down into the mud together. I was on top of him, panting, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I ripped open his pant leg, my hands slick with his blood. I applied the tourniquet, twisting the stick until the bright arterial spurting stopped. I looked at my hands. They were red, not the dark, dried blood of a stag, but the bright, living crimson of a man. I had crossed the line. I was part of the butchery now. Before I could breathe, the world went white. A mortar shell struck the parados of the trench, not 10 feet away. There was no sound this time, just a massive, invisible hand that picked me up and slammed me into the earth. The lights went out. I don't know how long I lay there. Seconds, minutes, time had dissolved. Slowly sensation returned. A dull ache in my head, a taste of copper. My vision swam into focus, blurry and gray. I was lying on my back, looking up at the smoke-choked sky. The sound returned slowly, as if someone were turning a dial. First a low thrum, then a muffled roar, and finally the full, terrifying volume of the battle crashed back in. I rolled over, retching. My head felt like it was splitting open. I wiped the mud from my eyes and looked around. The sergeant I had saved was gone, moved down the line perhaps, or buried. I was alone in a section of the trench that had partially collapsed. I pushed myself up to my knees. My medical bag was still there, battered but intact. I was alive. Volkov, the shout came from the darkness. A figure stumbled around the bend of the trench. It was a runner, a young soldier named Petrov. He was covered in gray dust, his eyes wild, his chest heaving as if he had run a marathon. He spotted me and scrambled over, grabbing my tunic with shaking hands. He looked like a ghost. "Volkov, are you the medic? Are you the medic?" he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "I'm here," I croaked, trying to stand, fighting the dizziness. "I'm here." Petrov pointed back the way he had come, toward the darkness of no man's land, toward the forward positions that were supposed to be our first line of defense. "It's the Zubber nest," he gasped, spitting blood and saliva. "The forward machine gun post. They've been overrun. The Germans are all over it." I stared at him. Zubber was 300 meters out. It was a death sentence. "They're dead then," I said, the hunter's cold logic speaking for me. "If they're overrun, they're dead." "No," Petrov shook me. "I heard them. On the wire. 2 of them are still alive. But they're hit bad. They can't move. They're bleeding out in the dark. Volkov, they're screaming for us." He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the reflection of my own fear. "You have to go," he whispered. "There's no one else." I looked out toward the flashing horizon, where the tracer fire wove a net of death too tight for a mouse to slip through. To go out there was suicide. It was tracking a wounded animal into the den of a bear. I tightened the strap of my medical bag. The ringing in my ears faded, replaced by the thumping of my heart. "Show me," I said. Petrov didn't need to show me much, just the direction. I stripped off my helmet. It rang against branches. It was a bell that invited death. I unslung my rifle and leaned it against the clay wall. A medic does not hunt with lead. I hunt with gauze and silence. I took only the bag and my knife. The grass was high, wet with the dew of a moonless night. I lowered my belly to the mud. I became the wolf I used to track in Arkhangelsk. Low, fluid, part of the earth. The shelling had stopped, leaving a silence that was heavier than the noise. That is when the forest is most dangerous, when it holds its breath. Every inch was a gamble. I didn't look with my eyes. I looked with my fingers. I pressed them into the soil before shifting my weight. Loose dirt meant a mine. A taut wire meant a bouncing Betty. I moved like smoke. 10 meters, 20. The smell of turned earth and rot grew stronger. I slid over the lip of the forward trench. It was a butcher's shop. The smell hit me first, iron and excrement. I found them by the heat of their bodies. 2 boys, Misha and Ivan. Misha was unconscious, his leg a ruin of bone and rag. Ivan was awake, his eyes wide. White discs in the gloom. He started to whimper. I clamped my hand over his mouth. His tears wet my palm. I worked by touch. My hands knew the shape of a wound better than my eyes. I found the artery on Misha's thigh. His leg pulsing. I tightened the tourniquet until the pulsing stopped. Ivan had a sucking chest wound. I ripped the packet of the dressing with my teeth. I pressed the seal over the hole in his ribs. The air hissed out of him, a dying tire. I fumbled for the morphine. One cigarette left. I jammed it into Misha's shoulder. Then, the light, a beam cut the darkness above us. White, blinding, it swept the lip of the trench. I froze. My hand was on Ivan's chest. The light stopped. It hovered inches above my head. I could hear the German boots crunching the gravel. They were right there. The cough, the click of a bolt. I did not breathe. A hunter knows that movement draws the eye, but sound draws the bullet. I needed them to look away. I dug my fingers into the trench wall and pulled out a heavy clod of wet clay. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed it 20 meters to the left, into a tangle of barbed wire. It landed with a heavy thud. The beam swung toward the noise. A voice barked a question in German. No. I grabbed Misha by his harness. I heaved him up the slope. I went back for Ivan. He was lighter. We crawled. I dragged them through the furrow I had made coming in. It was not a sprint. It was an agonizing, inch-by-inch haul. My muscles screamed. The mud sucked at my knees. But I knew the paths. I had memorized the mines. The darkness swallowed us. The German voices faded. We hit the friendly wire. Hands reached out from the gloom. Petrov, the sergeant. They pulled us over the parapet. I collapsed into the bottom of the trench, gasping, the taste of bile in my throat. I looked at my hands. They were black with blood that wasn't mine. Misha groaned. He was alive. That was 40 years ago. I sit here now by the edge of Lake Kenazero. The water is glass. The pines are tall and straight, unscarred by shrapnel. My grandchildren say I am lucky to have such peace. They do not know that silence is the loudest sound of all. In the taiga, when you trap a sable, you do it with respect. You take only what the forest gives. You lave the mothers. You lave the young. There is a balance. War is a fire that burns the ledger. It takes the strong, the weak, the trees, the soil. It honors nothing. I still have the ringing in my ears. A high, thin whine, like a mosquito that will not land. When I see a tree cut down for lumber, when I see the raw stump bleeding sap, I do not see wood. I see Misha's leg. I see the ruin of men. I was a trapper once. I knew how to read the trails. But the war destroyed the trail. It burned the map. I walk through these woods now, and I am a stranger in my own home. The traps are all sprung, but the game is gone. There is only the memory of the slaughter, and the smell of iron in the morning mist. This memory is a shard of glass I carry. Help me pull it out. Subscribe to keep this history alive.